Hello, and welcome to Migrating Assessment to the Cloud for More Secure Universities, Times Higher Education case study in partnership with Amazon Web Services. My name is Alistair Lawrence. I'm a Special Projects Header at THE, and I'm joined today by Laura Dawson, who is Chief Information Officer at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Laura, we'll start right away if you don't mind. And I'd like to begin by asking you, how did LSE identify the needs for cloud migration on your systems?
Okay, so the systems that we're talking about here were to do with our research compute. And that service is unlike some of the other services that you might see when you're talking about migrating to cloud, because it is one that it's not a flat service. It bursts at certain points, and it's also not necessarily a linear service. So you have somebody needs something for a short period of time and then it closes down. So you have lots of different styles of service, all needing compute and all needing storage. And what we'd done maybe 6 or 7 years ago is we'd put in place some equivalent of on-prem capabilities for research computing. And because it was on-prem, it was naturally had a kind of limit to what we could do. It was boxed in. And if you wanted to put more compute power in, or you want to put more storage in, you had to buy more stuff and put it in. And that isn't always a model that would work well from a finance perspective either. So you have a need that very much is elastic. It's elastic not only in how much and how little you use, but how long you use it and how short you use it as well. So that was kind of the key area. In addition, the academics themselves wanted to be more flexible, wanted to have more services, and were particularly keen to get away from internally supported services to something that was more modern and more available to them.
Okay, so you've touched on this slightly already, but what criteria did you set for the secure storage and usage that you were putting in place?
Well, actually there's two elements to this. One is a kind of just a basic service, which has a degree of security that you'd expect for normal operation. But we were also looking to secure some of the research data that we get is quite sensitive. It's about human beings, it's personal data, it might be sensitive personal data. So we wanted to make sure that we were meeting all of the requirements, not only of the UK's kind of legal side of things, but also the requirements of the data providers. And what is always a problem when you're moving from on-prem to cloud is actually the people that are making the decisions about whether or not something is secure or not secure may not know as much as the technologists about what is happening. And so there's an assumption that on-prem good, cloud bad. You don't remember that from maybe 10 years ago. It's like, ooh, don't go on the cloud, it's really insecure. Actually, that's completely flipped. And so some of the work that we had to do was also to give the data providers sufficient information and confidence that what we were doing was as secure, if not more secure, than what we were able to provide in an internally provided service.
Okay, and was it a lengthy process to put those assurances in place and contact all the interested parties?
Yeah, yes, it was. It's kind of, this is going to be a bit of an opinion really, but it's one of those things that's quite difficult. Like I said, quite often the people who are making the decisions about whether something is secure or not secure are not technologists. And there is maybe a lack of kind of tech savvy or cyber savvy understanding sometimes in some of those places. And so, yeah, it took a fair amount of time to have that kind of discussion and get to that point. And also to prove to ourselves that it was secure. I mean, you know, you don't want to go sort of trotting into a meeting and say, yes, it's secure, and not know yourself that it is. So there was quite a lot of time and effort spent on that.
And what were the kind of checks and balances that you put in place to make sure that you were satisfied?
Well, as I said, this criteria of assessments with the data providers as well, that they were satisfied that we were meeting the requirements of the data protection legislation. So yeah, we were using external kind of measures to do that. Interestingly, if you were to press me on the technical details, you probably wouldn't get very far. So don't.
That's absolutely fine. So So what feedback loops did you put in place? Did you actually go so far as to speak to staff and students to involve in this? You spoke about how people who were making decisions quite often weren't technologists. How wide did you cast the net so that everybody felt like they understood
Yeah.
the system you were using?
So within the school, I mean, that when I was talking about that, I was talking really about people outside of the school. The data providers are external to the school, and they're giving us their information so that we can do their research. Internally to the school, we actually had a project committee that was made up of academics who are particularly around about health data and all of those kinds of areas. So the members of that group, there was somebody on our project board, and then there was another group underneath that are continuously looking at how do we secure and maintain our sensitive health data type activities. So they were heavily involved. We are also in the middle, but we haven't quite finished it yet, of looking at where does the, if you like, product ownership of research compute sit, because it doesn't really sit within the central IT team, because then you're a long way away from your stakeholders and the consumers of the service. So we wanted to try and create a bit of a bridge, and that's we're in that process at the moment of making sure we've got that operating model clearly defined, and then we can move it closer to actually our data science institute, so that it's a much clearer kind of connection. And in fact, actually, when we went to the research committee with this, and we talked about maybe some of the challenges we were having, but also some of the successes we were having, they were very clear that we need to make sure that we are engaging with academics and getting their feedback. So the Data Science Institute's taken that on, and they are actually doing that now.
Okay, great. And have there been short-term benefits that you've noticed already from making the migration?
At the moment, no, not yet. Because it's still quite early days for us. I mean, so, you know, there will be, I mean, if nothing else, and this is going to sound a bit strange, it's more about the culture and the perception. If we can get this migration not only to be the migration to the cloud that we've put in place, but also to build the data science initiative and have that product management, then the perception that this is a service built by academics for academics will be a bit stronger. It'll feel more like their solution rather than this thing that's over there. So there's that kind of cultural thing, which I think is quite important for them.
And do you think that having something that's by academics for academics will change the way that learning communities work using it as a resource?
I think so. I hope so. I mean, what I'd like to see, I mean, there's all sorts of aspects to this that are not actually to do with the technology that drives adoption. So, and bear in mind, remember, this is a call-off service that we're creating. It's not it's not like, you know, a lift and shift of a particular business process or anything like that. This is a call-off service. And one of the big adoption issues is around about how does it get paid for, which, as you can imagine, is one of those things that's a bit kind of, where does that happen? So what I would hope we can do is we can encourage maybe other constituents to see it as a service that's for them, where before they might not have done. And that might include our PhD students, as opposed to just, you know, your kind of full-blown academic. So I think what it might do and what it might help us with is to democratize the service. And make it fairer and easier to access, and you know, the same level for everybody, the same good level for everybody, not a kind of not so good level for some people and a better level for others. So I think that's where we really want to get to.
Okay. And overall, you said it was quite a lengthy process to implement this. Is there, how does the maintenance and the upkeep of it work going forward? Are there certain check-ins and review points that you will set over, say, 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years?
I suspect we're going to need it's not just for Christmas approach, because the same with anything, and this is a problem actually generally with universities, I think, and I've been in the university sector for 4 years, so having come from outside, it surprises me how little there is in the way of roadmaps or emphasis on maintenance. So the emphasis is very much on service management. That's a big emphasis, and on delivery of new stuff, but very little in that kind of middle ground of maintenance. And with this, I think in order for it to stay fresh and to stay loved and to stay wanted by the constituents that use it, you have to maintain it. And that means updating the service. That means not just keeping the technology running, but making sure that you're delivering an end-to-end service that is fit for purpose.
And presumably having a more diverse group of people who are using it gives you a feedback group sort of by default. Then you are talking to different types of people, and they can see what they're getting out of it. And does it then become a case of also anticipating what requests you might get and building capacity to respond to people who are asking, oh, can we do this in future, or why doesn't it do that?
Yeah. And I mean, that's actually one of the key parts of putting the product management in. So if we have a really strong, and product management, again, is an area that's not really that well known within the university sector, and certainly not something that was here before I got here. But having that really strong sort of product manager who is able to engage with the stakeholders and gather their requirements in whichever methods they feel is appropriate, whether that is creating focus groups, whether that is having a forum, there's lots of different ways that you can do that. But what they have to do is to gather those requirements and then prioritize them into a pipeline that can be delivered. And I see that as very much the role of the product manager, to be that bridge between stakeholders and then what are we actually going to do. And that has to be as close to the business units, and in our case, this would be the researchers that are using it, as possible. If it's too far into the center, then there's a danger they don't connect well enough.
Okay, thank you. I mean, there's been a lot in the news over the past year and a half, how universities are adapting to initially being forced to move everything online, and perhaps predictably it was the teaching and learning aspect that was hitting the headlines. Now, as we return to something like what looks like a sort of medium to long-term operating model, do you think more attention will be paid to the research aspect long-term? People, there's been calls from places in the global south, for example, to end the kind of helicopter research approach, as it was known, where people kind of come in for a short period and leave, and build more sustainable links with international stakeholders in the research community. Does that just drive more need for the type of service that we're talking about today?
Without a doubt. And interestingly, we were having a conversation only yesterday about what are the services for research that we need to have in place. Actually, tackling another ethical issue, which is about sustainability. So, I mean, it's almost literally helicopter approach. So we need to consider how we are moving people around the world in order for them to conduct their research. So we were looking at a number of different aspects, and I'll see if I can try and remember them all. But there was one which is about bringing people into the room. So using what we've learned from hybrid teaching and creating hybrid research environments. So you are coming together in a collaborative space. I mean, it's a business meeting really, but let's call it, hybrid research. And having that kind of capability that you can bring researchers from around the world into a convening space. You can have people physically present, people virtually present, but you're reducing the carbon footprint by doing it. Great. So that was number one. Number two was about creating virtual collaborative spaces. So if the meeting idea and the meeting room is a point in time, you're coming together in a point in time, then creating virtual collaborative spaces, and the tools are all there. But there needs to be some way of federating identity so that you don't have the issues that we have at the moment, where you've got and the irony of this is not lost on me. You've got a tribe in Slack, you've got a tribe in Teams, you've got a tribe in insert name of other collaborative tool, and they're not communicating with each other. Collaborative tools that are still in silos blows my mind. But there are issues, can we create a space where it doesn't matter which academic organization you're in, you can get into that space and that you can collaborate. So that's the more permanent collaborative spaces. And that has to be cloud-based. Sorry. No, fine.
Do you see an appetite for shifting and changing the way that people are working? Because again, when this has been another criticism, or an observation rather, about the teaching and learning aspect of that universities provide, is that it's now that we can go back to how it was before. In some cases, there's an appetite to do it simply because we can, and not consider what what changes lie ahead? I mean, it sounds like you're already, when you're talking about hybrid research and virtual collaboration spaces and sustainability, setting very clear criteria and clear incentives to carry on taking a blended approach. But is it, like you were talking about before, getting buy-ins from different stakeholders so you can really change the mindset and the culture of working to keep people enthusiastic about migrating more online?
I think that is a really interesting question, and actually quite a difficult one to answer. And it applies not just to teaching and learning, but to actually just general office work in the first place. About, are we all going to spring back? And there's a little bit of me, maybe 20% of me that is quite worried that we are going to do that. We're going to spring back. And there are certainly people who get a buzz from standing in front of warm bodies, sharing their knowledge and having that kind of conversation. And there's no doubt about that. And it's much, much harder to get that when you've just got little boxes on a screen. So I kind of empathize with that kind of, where's that buzz? I mean, and people get energy from lots of different places. So maybe there is something in that. But I think what has happened over the last 2 years has given people confidence. So they might spring back, but they're confident and they know that they can do it, which means that when change does start to happen and we start moving into a much more normalized blended world, that excuse about I don't know how to use the technology or I'm not confident, that's gone. You've already proved it, guys. You know, it's gone and we can do it. But I do think that in order for us to get there, don't assume that people have made the change. You have to put them through a change program. You have to give them a chance to take, when you take away the urgency of the issue or you take away the reason for the issue, you still have to do a change process to get people to do it for normal. And I think there's a danger of just assuming that everyone's going to just be okay doing this in a hybrid way. They're not. They're not. And I think it's, and I'm not, I don't think we should be frightened of that. I just think we should recognize that, as my husband always says in a rather fake northern accent, change is not good. And and so they need help to kind of get there. And let's not underestimate that you take the imperative away and then suddenly, well, why am I doing this way?
Great, thank you. I think you've given us a really great overview of the work that you've done so far, what the main challenges are, that lie ahead too. Is there anything else that you think colleagues should bear in mind when they're looking at undertaking a major project such as this? You've spoke about the technological change and the cultural change required, and it seems like both are codependent and equally important. If there's anything that the work so far has taught you, what would be your main takeaway from it?
It's probably very specific to where we were at the time. Bear in mind we were doing this in the middle of a pandemic. I think for me is make sure you've got the governance in place to make the right decisions at the right time, because for your project team, we were all busy and they struggled a little bit to get traction with different people because they were scattered in crisis mode, doing all sorts of things. So I think just be aware that the decision making is really important, and people will need access to leadership in order to have those conversations. That's probably the main one. I think the other one is have the conversations with AWS about what it can do for you. I mean, they kind of know their product, so why don't you ask them about it? Just saying.
Okay, great. All right, brilliant. Well, thank you, Laura, and thank you very much for joining us and sharing your insights. And we will, like I say, we'll be sharing this with our audience of peers and higher education leaders. And if you follow the links to the THE and AWS Hub, you'll be able to find more discussions with senior leaders, summary articles, and insights that you're free to browse and share with colleagues. So thank you, Laura, very much for telling us what's been going on at LSE for these past few months. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Goodbye.
Thank you.